And this evening, I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker. She's an Egyptologist and art historian, Dr. Chahinda Karim. Dr. Karim is a professor of art history at the American University in Cairo, as well as a licensed tour guide in Egypt. Dr. Karim started early on to follow in the footsteps of her father, who was a prominent expert on Egyptology. She earned her master's degree in Egyptology and art history from the American University in Cairo and a doctorate from Cairo University. Dr. Karim brings to life the stories and sites of Egypt by combining elements of art, archaeology, art history, and cultural studies. Dr. Karim's relationship with the Museum of Science started in 1996, when she began guiding museum travelers on various itineraries through Egypt. And it's grown since then. Some of you may know that Dr. Karim has basically spent this week at the Museum of Science. She was our keynote speaker on Wednesday night at a Museum Council event. She also gave a lecture to high school students yesterday, and she'll be speaking basically all weekend for the Quest for Immortality Adult Seminar Series. So I think she spent more time at the museum this week than I have, so it's pretty impressive. Well, tonight Dr. Karim is going to share with us the tale of the female pharaoh Hatshepsut, whose mark on Egypt's history has survived despite the attempts of her nephew, Thutmose III, to destroy the archaeological evidence. So without further delay, please help me introduce and welcome Dr. Karim.
Thank you. And thank you for leaving your houses in this freezing weather to come and listen about Hatshepsut. Well, Hatshepsut and this gender problem between Hatshepsut and Thutmose III is one of those subjects that have interested art historians throughout ages, because there are so many problems involved in this particular time period. And I'm going to try today and just give you an idea about some of those problems and possible answers, since definite answers, I don't think that's possible, but at least possible answers. Now, I think you'll know that both Queen Hatshepsut and the king known as Thutmose III, that they were kings of the 18th dynasty of the New Kingdom. And this is, in fact, the beginning of the New Kingdom. And the New Kingdom, on the whole, is characterized by its ever-growing bureaucracy, which of course led to more documentation, and this put scribes and literary men in great demand. The historian Maniton, whose division of Egyptian pharaonic history into 30 dynasties, we still follow that until today, well, he has placed the 18th dynasty, the beginning of the 18th dynasty, with the king Ahmose as the founder of the 18th dynasty and also the founder of the New Kingdom after the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, because we've had for about 150 years a foreign people known as the Hyksos who had invaded Egypt and had taken part of Egypt. So with about 1500 BC, we know then that both lands were unified again, and so started the New Kingdom. Now, this king known as Ahmose, we know that he was one of the famous generals also, not just a king. He was what we call a warrior king, because he led the war, in fact, against the Hyksos. He was followed by his son, known as Amenhotep I, and he reigned for about 21 years, and he, in fact, did manage to continue the policy of his father and even those who before him were fighting against the Hyksos. But this king, the son known as Amenhotep I, he had no sons. So this became a problem. He had to choose someone to become the successor. And he did choose a middle-aged general called Thutmose I. And this is how we come to the Thutmose family. Now let me show you a slide. I'm doing something wrong? Yes, I am. So this is just a slide to give you an idea about the family tree, starting from, well, it starts from before, but about halfway you're going to see where Thutmoses I is. Now, Thutmoses I, remember, he was chosen. He was not from the same family. But it is still considered to be the same dynasty because he was, in fact, chosen by his predecessor. And from what we know, or we're not sure, there's some indication that he may have ruled, that he was a co-regent with Amenhotep or Amenophis I, but we're not sure about that. What we know, or what we're sure about, is that he was about 40 years old when he came to the throne, and that at his coronation he received a new title, and that is the title of Mighty Bull. Now, this is probably referring to the fact that he was a general in the army. And we know that within 2 years, he was in full control of all the provinces, the north of Egypt and south of Egypt. He was married to a lady called Ahmose, and she was probably of royal blood. Because normally, if someone who is not of royal blood is to become a king, he has to marry a lady who is from royal blood so that he can become a king. So he had to marry her to make his position secure. And this was a common practice, as I said, in Egypt. It started already from the very beginning of Egyptian history. It started with the first king of Egypt, Narmer, where he did marry a princess from the one part of Egypt in order to be able to control all parts of Egypt. Now, he did prove to be a great general, and he was also a great warrior, as I said, one of the warrior kings. And we know that his troops marched into Nubia, which is the south of Egypt, and that were moving towards the north. Let me show you a map. You can see here, do you see where the Mitanni is written? So that, in fact, he moved and he crossed into this land that you see here in order to gain part, or let us say extend the boundaries of Egypt towards the north and the east. Now, it is the succession after Thutmoses I that is known as the Hatshepsut problem. It starts immediately with the death of Thutmoses I. Now, why does it start? Now, let us say the most accepted version, because there are many versions to the story of Hatshepsut. But the most accepted version about the story of Hatshepsut is that she was the daughter of Thutmoses I, and at the age of 12 was forced to marry her half-brother Thutmoses II, because she was the daughter of the royal mother. But from the royal mother there was no son, so that in fact Thutmoses II was the son of a secondary wife, of another wife, not of royal blood. So that he became a king, he had to marry her, because that was the only way that he could become a king. So this is what we know about the first succession. Now, brother and sister marriages may appear rather strange today to all of us, but it was quite the norm, or the normal among the royal family in ancient Egypt. Why? Because it was a useful way of reinforcing the links between the pharaoh and the gods, while emphasizing the gulf which is between the immediate royal family and the rest of the Egyptians, the rest of the population. Now, what do we know about that period? Well, she was very young when she married her brother, but we also know that he was not physically fit. I mean, what we know about Thutmoses II is that he was, well, a sickly person, he was a frail man, and he did not engage in any military action, not at all like Thutmoses I. Some historians consider that this may be because of his weakness, since he was of poor health. Now, this does not have to be the case, because the borders had already been completely secured by his predecessor, and there was no need, in fact, for any military campaigns at that time, and it does not necessarily mean a sign of weakness. Now, Hatshepsut appears on the scene, and let me now show you a slide. And there you have Queen Hatshepsut as she first appears. She appears on the scene with, like a queen. She has a female body, but she is wearing a crown. And she does all her titles at the very beginning are, in fact, of a queen, not of a reigning king. And there is, in fact, a a stele which is now in Berlin, where she is shown standing behind Thutmose II, the typical queen standing behind her husband. And she must have accepted her position as king's wife, for the first tomb that she built in Egypt was not built in the Valley of the Kings. It was built, in fact, high up in a cliff facing the Nile Valley. It is the area where we have her temple today, which is the temple of the Deir al-Bahari. So it was not even overlooking the Valley of the Kings, so she could not have considered herself a king at the very beginning. Well, this tomb was left unfinished when she became a king. When she suddenly changed herself to a king, a royal, a man, well, she completely left this tomb. She left it unfinished. Now, this, at least to me, is an indication that she was not really as ambitious as some try to say. Okay, she was not from the beginning planning to take over power, and she is described, for instance, by Hayes, this is in the Cambridge Ancient History, that she is described as a princess planning from the very beginning to take over power. And he really describes her as a woman seeking power. But there is no proof of that. We have no proof whatsoever to assume or to accept this assumption that she was the real power during her brother's short life. And it was a short life. Now you can see from this representation that this idea that she was always represented as a man is not true. We have representations of her as a woman, and these were never, in fact, destroyed. Now Hatshepsut, she bore her half-brother one daughter, and this daughter was known as Neferure, that you see here. She is represented as a child seated on the knees of her tutor, who was Senmut, who played then later quite an important role in the life of the queen Hatshepsut. Now, some art historians, but again we're not entirely sure about that, but some art historians, they believe that she had a second daughter. And the second daughter was called Meritre Hatshepsut. In fact, she's known in some of the books as Hatshepsut II. And they believe that she's the one then, because she's the one who married Thutmose III. Meritre Hatshepsut became the wife of Thutmose III. Some believe she was a daughter of Hatshepsut. But Hatshepsut never mentioned a second daughter. And it appears very clear from the representations that we have, like this one here, that it is Neferure who was being prepared, in fact, to become the royal wife of Thutmose III. The problem is, she never did. She never married Thutmose III, or at least we have no mention of her ever marrying Thutmose III. I'm talking about the daughter, Neferure, who is represented here. We have a tomb in the area called Al-Kab. Al-Kab is about north of Aswan. Well, it is the tomb of a nobleman called Ahmose Penecheb, and he, in one of the inscriptions, proudly says that he was chosen to educate the princess, and he was succeeded in his post by Senenmut, whom you see now on the slide. And we have several statues of Senenmut with the daughter on his knees. So he must have been, in fact, as I said, the tutor of this young child who was then being prepared to become the wife of Thutmose III, but never did become the wife. So as I mentioned, Neferure is a problematic figure. Not only because we have no record of her marriage, but she is also called later, and this is when Hatshepsut declared herself as a man, as a king, a ruling king, she is then referred to as a god's wife. Now this is quite a problem, because this is a title normally held by the principal wife of a king, okay? And yet we have no mention that she ever married a king. This title needs some explanation, and to do that I have to talk briefly about the role of women in ancient Egypt, especially, of course, during the New Kingdom. From the later 17th dynasty onwards, we can see a profound change in the nature of the role of queens. The status of a queen was still, of course, derived from her relationship with the king, but more emphasis was placed both on the individuality of the queen and on the divinity of her role. And by the early 18th dynasty, queens were given secular as well as religious titles. They owned estates and were portrayed wearing crowns. 3 ladies played an important role from the beginning of the 18th dynasty. One was called Tetisheri, one was called Ahotep, and the last was called Thutmose Nefertari. Now the first, which is Tetisheri, she was the grandmother of this king Thutmose, the founder of the New Kingdom. The second, Ahotep, was his mother, and the third was his wife. So already from the very beginning of the New Kingdom. Now Ahotep, whose mother, the mother of, in fact, Thutmose, she exercised power when her husband died. Because when her husband died, the Thutmose was still a child who could not really take over power. And on a stele found in the temple of Karnak in Luxor, well, she is described. He, in fact, has written a whole stele describing his mother. And this is like a translation. He said, she is the lady who looked after his soldiers, brought back fugitives, rounded up deserters, and hunted down rebels. So she was really a queen, a reigning queen, not just a queen. She was really ruling at that time. Her daughter-in-law, Thutmose Nefertari, owes her fame less to her political leadership than to her high position in the religious establishment, and especially in that of the god known as Amen, or Amun. This is just the lid of the coffin of the lady called Ahotep that you see here, because she played such an important role, and she's, as said, as she ruled Egypt for quite a few years until her son was old enough in order to take over power himself. Amun is the figure, or Amen. The right pronunciation is really Amun and not Amen. And he was the main god of Egypt during the New Kingdom. He was one of the gods representing the sun, since we have different representations of the sun god. And Amun was at one time just a local god who, at the beginning of the New Kingdom, started becoming the main god of Egypt. Sorry, I lost. I lost the thing to choose the slides. Now I have no light. Oh, there it is. Okay, I'm fine. So if you just look at the representation of Amun, you can see that he's always represented, of course, as a human being, but he does have the 2 long feathers over his head that you see here. Well, to go back then, in this establishment of this god, Thutmose Nefertari, she took on a new title, and that was of God's wife. So the idea of a God's wife was a new title that appears on the scene around that time. And it, in fact, refers to the first appearance of the sun god, who was known as Atum. And he was the god who fashioned the universe by ejecting from himself a male principle called Shu and a female principle called Tefnut. One represented, in fact, dry, and the other was moisture. And with this, the process of creation started, because you had the female and the male, and then the creation started. They had children and then grandchildren, and this was the beginning of life. So the marriage of a priestess to the god Amen or Amun perpetuated the idea of the cosmic myth and ensured the continuity of the work of creation. This is, to all Egyptians, it was an everlasting cyclic process. Now, this role of God's wife was greatly emphasized, and a virgin from the college of priestesses was normally chosen as God's wife, and she would then become the queen. Well, the donation stele that was found in one of the pylons of the Karnak temple commemorates the founding of a college of women, all serving the god Amin or Amun. But we know little about the function of those ladies, and we also know very little about the function of God's wife. It was a religious title, but we don't know the real function of it. Now, as far as we know, Queen Hatshepsut was about somewhere between 20 and 30, to be more correct, when her father, in fact, died, and when her husband died, and then her half-brother when he died, and then she became Queen Regent, put it this way. Why Queen Regent? Because, in fact, when Thutmose II, her half-brother, died, Thutmose III was a child. Just exactly how young, that we don't really know. In fact, you may even find books that tell you he was a baby, but we don't think so. He was probably a young man at that time. And what we do know is that she became the Queen Regent. As I said, she was the ruling queen, which was normal. I mean, this is exactly what happened before. When Ahmose died, his mother took over. So she, in fact, became the ruling queen, ruling in the name of Thutmose III, but she was not a king at the very beginning of her reign. It was the year 7. So after 7 years of being a Queen Regent, suddenly the situation changed. She crossed the line from queen to king and made her change status public. She even invented the myth of the divine birth of kings to prove her absolute right to be a king. The story of her divine conception and birth is, of course, portrayed on the walls of her temple. Now, okay, think about it. Egyptians must have known that it takes a man and a woman to make a baby. And it doesn't take a god and a woman to make a baby. But what Hatshepsut emphasized was the doctrine of theogamy, okay, which means the physical union of a queen with a god, where Amun disguised himself as the king and actually slept with the queen, and this way she becomes pregnant from the god who is in the shape of her husband. So if you look, here she is represented with Thutmose III, and they're both identical, they're both the same size. This is the time when she was still Queen Regent. This is before year 7, when she suddenly became king. This is a representation of her as she changed her status. Now you have Hatshepsut, a beautiful young face, and you notice she's wearing the royal crown, known as the Nemes crown, and she has the beard. She is represented as a man. And if you look at this representation, can you see the pregnant? Okay, I need to get to the front. If you look, do you see the? This is the figure of the mother, as you can see, of Hatshepsut, and you can see the pregnancy after then her conception from the god. This is all from her temple. And then, after this, you see the birth, of course, and the thing is, if you look very closely, she's not represented as a girl, so that she was born as a king. So here you see with a lock of hair on one side, but she is in fact represented as a typical royal son. And this is what you see then in the representation here. So what she did then is to represent herself as being born from the very beginning as the daughter of the god Amun and also as the royal king, so as a man. In fact, in her story, her father presents her to the court as co-regent and successor. In fact, the unchallenged succession of Thutmose III confirms that this is not true. She was never meant to be a reigning king, either when she married her brother or when her brother died and Thutmose III became a king. There was no challenge to the throne at that time whatsoever. And of course, one can ask the question that if she really thought that she was born king, why did she wait for 7 years? Why didn't she, from the very beginning, from the minute that her husband died, why didn't she proclaim herself king? Thutmose III was put in a military school, so he was being trained to become, in fact, the general of an army. She must have known at that time that the longer she stays, the longer she waits to proclaim herself a king, that it would become more difficult, because the older he grows, of course, he would not accept the situation whatsoever. And yet she waited for 7 years. And strangely enough, she becomes king, and he does not even argue about it, remains as a general in the army at that time. Well, another point that I think I should make here, as a king, you are entitled a tomb, remember, in the Valley of the Kings, which she did not build at the beginning, because she did not expect to be a king. But the minute, in fact, she became a king, she started building a new tomb in the Valley of the King. So it's very obvious that it took 7 years for her to take that decision. Why spend all the money and all the trouble to build a tomb which is not in the Valley of the Kings, and then when it's 3/4 finished, you just leave it empty in order to go and build a new tomb in the Valley of the Kings? This again, I think, is a clear indication she did not have the intention from the beginning to become a king. This is something that occurred at a certain time in her life after 7 years. Now, this is in fact the tomb that was found. This is what we call KV20, and it may have been originally her father's tomb, we don't know, which she then enlarged, because the mummy of the father, Thutmose I, was removed and was in fact buried in another tomb built by Thutmose III. So this may have been the tomb of her father in the Valley of the Kings, which he then enlarged to become her tomb. 2 sarcophagi were found inside, and one of them does have, of course, her name, but we did not find her mummy, so we don't really know what she looked like, because her mummy was never found. And let me point out also that in the first tomb that she built, which is the one that is not in the Valley of the Kings, we did find her sarcophagus. We found the name of it, and the name is not her royal name as a king. It was her as the wife of a king. So that she changed to a king only when she built the second tomb, which is the one in the Valley of the Kings. Now, this is just to show you the other tomb. This is where Thutmose was found, because this was built, it's a much smaller tomb. Thutmose III built another tomb for his grandfather, and this is the plan of the second tomb. Her tomb, as you can see, let me go back, is a much, much deeper tomb, and it goes into, as you can see here, from once you go, it's carved in the rock, and you keep on going, and it's from here that you get the impression that she must have, gone further down in order to build the offering chambers and then the burial chamber for herself. And she planned, of course, to be buried with her father, but Thutmose III removed the mummy of the father. Okay, so let's continue then with Hatshepsut. At the beginning of her reign, she is sometimes represented as a woman, which I showed you before, but then later with the headdress, and she becomes then the famous king of Egypt. And we have to bear in mind something when I say that she was represented as a king. I think that there's a point here that I have to make. The male dress and appearance was a clear sign of her altered state from queen to king. This did not mean that she was a transvestite, because some believe that she was a transvestite, which she was not. I mean, this is going a bit far. Because we have to say images in general of pharaohs, and a pharaoh, I mean here the king, images of pharaohs were designed to convey aspects of kingship, popular at a particular time. Everyone knew that she was a woman, but to the ancient Egyptians, a king was a post and had to be correctly represented. This is why she, and in fact all later foreign rulers, whether they were the Greeks or the Romans who came to Egypt, they all represented themselves as a pharaoh, because this was the sign of a post. So when she represented herself as a man, it is not to try to convince people that she was a man, because that's going a bit too far. She was only doing this because the post of a king needs the representation of a pharaoh. So I just wanted to clarify this point. Why did she suddenly represent herself as a man? Now, her reign was quite peaceful. She did not lead any military campaigns. She did not want to go to war. And of course, you can imagine, a lot of art historians started saying this is because of her gender. Because she was a woman, she was weak, so she could not lead any military campaigns. Well, think about it. Thutmose II did not lead any campaigns because his boundaries were secure and he didn't need to. So it's the same with Hatshepsut. Her boundaries were secure. Why would she go to war? So it has nothing to do with gender. It has nothing to do with weakness. It was just the fact that there was no need to go to war. She started a building campaign. She built temples. She spent her expeditions to Punt, which is today's Somalia, and brought a lot of goods, especially incense from there. And if you look, this is a representation of Hatshepsut as a sphinx. With this, she's always represented with a kind of an oval, sort of slightly oval, almost triangular face, but rounded at the sides. And she has always like big eyes and a rather straight nose. So she does have beautiful features. Now, that does not necessarily indicate that this is the way she looked, because these were idealized portraits. And in fact, the representations that we have of Hatshepsut and Thutmose III are very similar. Okay, they belong to the same family. There was a resemblance, but as I said, they're idealized portraits. Here you can see a statue of her when she became a king, wearing the crown of Upper Egypt in this case. The beard is now missing, but she did have a beard, the same facial features, and in fact, Thutmose III put his name on it. So he didn't mind putting his name on her statues, since the features of the face were very similar anyway. And this is again to represent her, to show that we have her as a woman and we have her sometimes as a man. This is a beautiful face from a statue. I mean, this is a full statue, but I just wanted you to see the details of the face, because this is again Hatshepsut, but the name is Thutmose III. But it's very clear from where the name is written on the statue that the name of Thutmose III was written over the name of Hatshepsut. Okay, so that this is a very clear indication that he didn't mind, in fact, putting his name on her statues, since, as I said, they're all idealized representations anyway. He built obelisks, and the obelisks, and so did she, and she has the famous obelisk that is in the Karnak temple. The obelisks were representations or dedicated to the sun god, where the top part is always like a pyramid, so that when the sun god sends its rays on the peak of this pyramid shape, which is on top, it will be distributed in the 4 directions of Earth. So that sometimes they covered the top part with gold or with electrum, so that when the sun shines, you can really see an obelisk from everywhere. And she has one of the biggest obelisks built in Egypt, which is standing until today in the Karnak temple. Apart from the several obelisks that she built, she has, of course, the most famous temple, which is the temple of what we call the Deir al-Bahari, which is in Luxor today, and this was her funerary temple. Now, in the earlier periods, when they built a tomb or a pyramid, they used to build 2 temples attached to it, a valley temple and a funerary temple. By the time you get to this period, which is the New Kingdom, they separated the funerary temple from the tomb. And there were no more valley temples. So this was her funerary temple for funerary processions, but at the same time, they used to have certain feasts and festivals that used to take place on a yearly basis. There was the Feast of the Valley, where the statues of the gods were transported from one side of the Nile to the other side of the Nile, and they were then placed in this temple for a certain period of time. So she built a temple not just for herself. She was building a funerary temple for herself, for her father, whom she said was Amun, the main god, so that when the god statue is brought, it will then come and visit this temple here. Now, to go a little bit further with this, before I talk about this particular slide, one of the most important figures of her reign, remember I pointed out, was Senmut, or Senenmut, as he's called. He was the one represented with her daughter at the very beginning. He's the one who supervised the works when building this famous temple, and he was also the tutor of her daughter. There is a theory that maintains that he was Hatshepsut's lover. Well, there are 3 reasons for this particular theory. Number 1, he is nowhere represented with a wife and children. And he was allowed, the second reason is, he was allowed to represent himself in her temple, which is something that was not normally at all allowed for a non-royal person to be represented inside a temple. Okay, the third reason, in a cliff above the temple, so the temple, and let me bring this back, in this cliff that you see right behind the temple here, in this part, okay, there was a kind of a cave, which was in fact an earlier tomb from the Middle Kingdom, and it was used by the workmen who were then building this temple here. Well, we found a sort of like a graffiti on the walls, as well as sort of line drawing on the walls. And there we have a crude graffiti which shows a fully clothed male, and this was identified as Hatshepsut, being approached by a smaller naked man whom they identified, I don't know why, but as Senmut. Another graffiti shows Hatshepsut naked, but without any kind of female forms, being approached again by a man. So the conclusion came, he must have been her lover, and people were making fun of that. Well, all I can say is, from such graffiti, one can only conclude that workmen were speculating about her sexual life. All women who have dominated a man's world have attracted speculation about their sexual life. And I don't think that this proves anything at all, and we have no even reason to say that this is Hatshepsut and Senenmut. Well, anyway, Senenmut will disappear completely from history, and he will then die. And he built several tombs for himself, but was never buried in any of them. And we don't know whether he was killed or not. We don't really know. And we don't even know how she died. I mean, she dies and disappears from history, and since we have no mummy, we don't know whether she was killed or whether she died a natural death. Well, when she died, Thutmose III became automatically king. Well, he was king before she turned herself into a king. And in fact, as far as we know, she never named another successor. I mean, she turned herself into a king, but she never named another successor. Okay, so she took it for granted that he will succeed anyway. Well, a couple of months later, he led a whole army. I told you he was a general in the army. He led an army of 20,000 men across Sinai into Palestine. And this was one of many campaigns. And he had a very interesting general in his army known as Jehuti. And his tomb was discovered. And there are a lot of inscriptions in his tomb telling us about those military campaigns. And he tells us about how he managed to take the city of Joppa while he was going on his way to Palestine. And the way he describes it, it's exactly like the story of Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. How he hid 200 soldiers in big baskets on sort of donkeys and managed to enter the city with them. And once they were in the city and they closed the door of the city, they came out and captured the city. So it's very interesting where Ali Baba comes from. It is from this story of Jehuti. Now, on the whole, I can say that the reign of Thutmose III can be considered the heroic age of Egypt. It's the same. Like in Greece, you had the siege of Troy, was the heroic age of Greece. Well, Thutmose III was the heroic age of Egypt, because he's expanded his boundary. He even crossed the Euphrates. And he entered again to the lands of the Mitanni, and he put like boundary steles wherever he went to show how far he had expanded the boundaries. And we did find a stele, which is called the Victory stele, where in fact he talks a lot as if the god is talking about how he managed to expand the boundaries of Egypt. Now, he becomes one of the most famous kings of Egypt, not only because he was a great general expanding all the boundaries, but his method of war, he started something that was not known before, and that is catching the enemy by surprise. Again, when he was trying to capture the fortress of Megiddo, he took the most difficult path getting there, the one path where no one would have expected him to go. And when he arrived there, the enemy were looking at the other side, expecting him to come through the longer way. And of course, he caught them by surprise. So he was, as I said, he was quite a general in the army. And what he did, whenever he conquered an area, he took the sons of the leaders of that particular area to Egypt and educated them in the court, in the Egyptian court, so that they would become Egyptianized. And so that when they returned to their country and become leaders of their country, they would always be faithful to Egypt. So this is again a system that was not known in ancient Egypt before Thutmose III. Now, at the end of his year 39, and I mean here, of course, not that he was 39 years old, I mean 39 years of reign, we know that his empire stretched from the upper Euphrates in Asia Minor to the fourth cataract in Sudan. So that is really quite a large expansion. And this required new posts in the bureaucracy. And of course, the role of the vizier became extremely important. And he was at the height of his career when he started his campaign to erase Hatshepsut's name. So he did not do it at the very beginning. He had conquered all those lands. He had become the most famous king of that particular period. He was respected and feared by all countries surrounding Egypt. At this height of the career, he suddenly decided that he's going to scratch out Hatshepsut's name. Now, this is very serious, because to the ancient Egyptians, if you remove the name, the spirit will not be able to find its physical body again, or its physical representation. And it means that you are, sentencing this person to oblivion, to complete disappearance from history. So this is extremely serious act, is to go and scratch out the name. And yet, if we think of what he did, he scratched out the name of Hatshepsut as a king, not of her as a royal wife. So he was not, in fact, trying to, let us say, make people forget Hatshepsut. He wanted only that one period, Hatshepsut as a king, to be removed from history. So otherwise, we would not have found the statue where she's as a woman. Even in her temple, in several places, we still see her cartouche. It's not everywhere that we don't find it, but her cartouche as a king, he systematically scratched out everywhere. Why? Some believe it was hatred. He hated her so much. Okay, if he hated her so much, why did he wait so long? Why didn't he do that the minute he became a king? The only thing I can think about is male ego. That you reach a certain point in history, you've become the most famous king, you're respected by everyone, and you look back, well, how come I was kept aside for so many years, and it was about 20 years. It was not a matter of a year or two. At 20 years, I was kept aside by a woman. Well, maybe it is better to scratch that out from history, so that no one would ever remember that again. And he was successful. Because even in the royal lists that we have, like the royal list that we have, for instance, at Abydos, her name is not included. Okay, as a king, because there you only have the cartouches of kings. So he managed to wipe out her memory as a king until modern archaeology brought her back. And he was not successful in what he was trying to do. So, as I said, it seems to me to be just pure male ego. It's not hate, because if he hated her, he would not have usurped her statues. If he hated her, he would not have waited that long. Now let's look at one or two of the slides before I go. This is a representation. It's not necessarily from the temple of Hatshepsut. It is in fact just to show you that in those festivals, they tended to have a lot of music and dancing, so that the Egyptians were really people who had festivals for all occasions. One of the occasions was that after 30 years of reign, a king had to do what we call the Sed festival, to show that he was fit. He counted his first Sed festival not from the day Hatshepsut died. He counted it from the day he became a king. Okay, so again, as if he just removed those 20 years completely from history. This is again just another of those statues of Senmut with a Neferure, this poor daughter who never became a queen. This is one of the most beautiful statues that we have of Thutmose III. Face-wise, he looks very much like Hatshepsut. This is grey whack, the stone. And it's this time period, look, it's the same face, which starts by being triangular but is more rounded towards the cheeks, the same big eyes, the same rather pointed, very delicate features. And as I said, this was the art of that particular period. And this is the Sphinx of also the same king. And you see that if I put this one near the Sphinx that I showed you before of Queen Hatshepsut, unless you read the name, you would not be able really to say which is which. Now his mummy was found, Thutmose III. Hatshepsut's mummy was not found. But his mummy was found, as you can see here, and it was not found in his tomb. It was found in this cachette, as we call it, where during the 21st dynasty all the mummies were removed from their original tombs and they were put together in two main tombs. So he was found in a cachette. The hole that you see, there's a hole on one side of the mummy, which is up here, in this part here. These are thieves who had opened the bandages to try and go inside and see, because normally they used to bandage golden amulets to protect the mummy. So they were looking for some of the amulets, and that's how you see the mummy that you see here. This is a view of the Valley of the King, and what is interesting about his tomb is all the other tombs are along, the valley, the lower part of the mountain. He went up the whole mountain. In the one area where normally the water, when it rains a lot, the water stands at the upper part of the mountain, and there's like a crevice in the mountain, and the water comes down through it. So he went into that deep area and built his tomb, so that it was not at all easy to discover the tomb. And this is a view of the tomb that you can see here. Now the tomb is quite interesting because, as you can see, you enter through the main. I'll show it to you from here. There's a staircase, and of course this is dug in the rock, in the natural rock that you have here. All of this part that you see here, until you get to this part, all of this is in fact completely unfinished. So it's an unfinished tomb. There's a part here which is like a shaft, a deep shaft, so that the archaeologist, when he went in, he had to put a sort of a wooden, like a staircase, to be able to cross it. There was a bit of the remains of paint in that particular part here, and this is known as the shaft that would catch the water in case of heavy rain. And some believe that it was also built because most of the tombs have a shaft like this before you reach the burial chamber. It was to mislead the thieves so that they would not find the burial chamber. Then you enter the first chamber here, and it had two pillars, and the chamber had line drawing all along the walls, and they're all representations of gods. You have all the gods of Egypt are represented in a line drawing. It's excellent representation. And in this part, a statue was found of wood of the king, which I'm going to show you in a minute. And then they entered the second. This is the burial chamber, and this is the one that is then in the reproduction that you have in the quest for immortality, with the four side rooms. In the four side rooms, remains of offerings were found. remains of statues, but they had been demolished. 2 mummies were found in one of the side rooms, but in fact the 2 mummies are from a much later period put inside. His sarcophagus was behind the 2 pillars, as you can see. What is interesting is that the walls, all the walls, have the representation of one of the books of the dead, known as the Amduat, and this is the book that divides the journey of the soul into 12 different hours, so that the soul or the spirit of the king would unify itself with the sun god and then go through the 12 hours until it is judged in the last judgment, and from there then it will resurrect into the land of reeds, which is equivalent to our paradise. So this is one of the interesting features about this particular tomb chamber. You can see the wooden statue that was found in the first chamber of Thutmose III. And the type of line drawing is like what you see here, the 12 hours. This is, in fact, the first hour that you see here, which represents the sun god coming into this domain of the afterlife, which is the sunset. And they are all rejoicing and waiting for him. No, sorry, this is not the first hour. I'm looking at the thing. No, this is the 6th hour. Okay, so I missed the slide of the first hour. Let me explain what is the Amduat. In the first hour, the king unifies with the sun god and goes into the first hour after sunset. This is not a punishment yet. Everyone, all the souls, the creatures of this next world, they await him, and they're very happy because he's bringing light into this other world. In the second hour, it is the same. You see the people. To the Egyptians, it's a continuation of life. They're going to keep on living. It's going to be along the Nile. It will be the fertile land, but of course different without the dangers that we have in this life. For 5 hours, it is passing from one domain to the other one that really represents different areas of Egypt. The 6th hour is when you go to the complete depth, which is in fact what you see here. And in the complete depth, the sun god is going to unite with the corpse of Osiris. When the 2 unite, the resurrection is going to start. So that you see like a beetle, and you see a mummy but moving its leg. You see here, moving a leg up, like a arm up, so that you are the resurrection is beginning from the 6th hour. And then you have obstacles. 7th and 8th and 9th and 10th and 11th hour. They're all obstacles. It's a way for the soul to purify itself. And the 12th hour, you get the resurrection. And this is what you see here. There's a big snake. The sunboat will go through the tail of the snake, will come out again, rejuvenated, and then the beetle was the symbol of resurrection, and then it is taken by the god of atmosphere, and the day will start again. And since the day starts every day again, and the night comes back everywhere, so to them this was eternal life. This was a continuity that they believed will go on forever and ever. So these are just 2 of the hours of that period. The next few slides are just, I wanted to show you here that the female, the royal pair was always a very important representation. This is from the Old Kingdom, and you can see here the king, Mycerinus, from the 4th dynasty, with his wife being represented here. And again, you have both are represented. She is slightly smaller, which is normal. He was the king, and she was the queen, or not the ruling queen. Even higher officials, not only kings and queens are represented, but a lot of the higher officials who built beautiful tombs also had statues of themselves and their families here with wife and child, as you can see here, represented inside the tombs, because those statues were very important for the soul. They are the physical body that the soul needs in order to continue to live. We have steles that were put in temples as well, of ladies, and you can see one of the ladies offering here to the god Osiris, who is the god of the dead. This is just to say that this is one representation I could not help but bring. Hatshepsut you see how beautiful she is represented. And as I said, they're all idealistic representation. And yet when she represented the Queen of Punt coming to visit Egypt, well, she represented her completely deformed. And some say that because, she wanted to show the difference between an Egyptian king or queen and a non-Egyptian queen. Others say that the lady was, in fact, sick. And this is what she looked like. So they were willing to portray the others as portraits. But the royal pharaoh could not be represented as a portrait. It had to be the idealized representation. So this is just to show you the difference between Hatshepsut, and then you saw the Queen of Punt in her deformed representation. This is just to show you one of those representations of Hatshepsut after Thutmose III started scratching out her representations as a king and her name as a king. So in a temple, a beautiful temple, and unfortunately we get this defacing of Hatshepsut as a queen. All right, so to conclude to this, you've seen now Thutmose III and Hatshepsut, the gender problems. Well, all I can say is, has anything changed? Isn't it exactly the same? Life is the same problems. Nothing has changed. And I think that's just it. Gender problems started from the minute mankind appeared on this earth and will continue forever. And this was just one example of it from the ancient period. And with this, I think I'll put an end and say thank you for listening.
I think we'll have time for just a few questions. I want to be conscious of everyone's schedule tonight. So are there any questions in the audience?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, if Moses the third, all right, managed to remove what's the name of the queen of the Hapshepsut name, all right? Yeah. I come about for people to find out that she was queen, she was king.
Good question. The question was, just to repeat it, if the name of Hatshepsut was removed by Thutmose III from all of these various representations, how did we come about and find out about her afterwards?
In fact, by scratching out her name, this is what attracted, I think, the attention of the early archaeologists who started working. And even when scratching out, you can still, if you put a paper and start drawing, you can come out with what was in fact there. And by seeing, because it was her temple, and then she has a chapel, because she built several things. She has a chapel also within Temple of Karnak. It was the same thing. You have one representation completely scratched out with the cartouche. So they started, just gathering all of this, and it became very clear that we have a cartouche of a king who is missing from the list of kings. That just didn't come down in the list of kings. And since it was her temple and it was her chapel, I think the whole story started unfolding slowly. That's...
Could you tell us how early in the Egyptian dynasty this religion developed?
So the question was, how early in the Egyptian dynasties did this religion develop? Is that correct?
Are you referring then to the Amduat that I was talking about, the Book of the Dead? All right. The earliest religious texts appeared during the Old Kingdom. They appeared during the 5th dynasty, and this was the pyramid known as the Pyramid of Wanis or Unas. And the pyramid texts already started explaining about death and then resurrection. And from those texts, it becomes already clear that the Egyptians believed that death was in 2 stages. The first stage is when the body ceases to function. So this is death that we know. But this is not the death that they feared, because they believed that by joining the sun god with the right prayers, then automatically one will resurrect. What they feared was that while you are going through those 12 hours, maybe you do not pass one of the obstacles, because there were obstacles on the way. Or in the Last Judgment, You may not pass the last judgment. And then that is the real death that they feared, is that to completely disappear. So it becomes, but it is not very clear in the pyramid texts. Okay? We already have the beginning of the Osiris appears as the god of the dead and god of resurrection. But it does not really become clear before the New Kingdom. It is in the New Kingdom that we start getting different books. Not just one, but we have different books. And all of them revolve around the same idea, that there are 12 hours, or 12 gates, or 12 caverns. They're always 12 because they represent the 12 hours of the night. They all represent the same idea that it is like purgatory, that there are obstacles you have to go through, and then there's a last judgment. In the last judgment, it's a bit different from our ideas today, because instead of saying what they have done, they say what they have not done. So I have not killed, I have not done anything bad, so they become the negative confessions. And then it's resurrection. So I think that the idea of a religion with death, with life, death, purgatory, last judgment, resurrection, started already from the beginning, from the Old Kingdom.
When I started to hear about this Book of the Dead and the 12 hours of day and night, I thought, well, I guess Egypt is on the equator. That's where you have 12 hours of day and 12 hours of dark. And then I looked at the map and I was very wrong. So they really would have only had 12 hours of day and night, like we do long a couple of times a year. So I was wondering where that 12 hours came from.
In fact, the calendar that the Egyptians followed is very similar to ours, and everything from the beginning is represented as 12 hours of the day and 12 hours of night. How did they develop it? No, I don't think I know that. But said it appears from the very beginning. They're always talking about the 12 hours of the day and we have even the gods representing the hours of the day and the night. But how exactly it started, I'm sorry, I don't think I can answer that.
Take one more question.
Do we have any evidence that the Christian texts about resurrection were directly influenced by the Egyptian texts?
It's a very interesting question. I mean, here was the question whether the Christian idea about life, death, and resurrection, whether it goes back to the ancient Egyptian ones, not necessarily the Book of the Dead. Personally, I think yes. I think that the ancient Egyptian religion was the basis of all later religions. And there are so many parallels that we just cannot ignore them and say, no, this is a new religion coming out. And I think that, God has sent his message at different times, and probably the first message was what the ancient Egyptians received, and then it developed.
Well, thank you very much,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Karim.
Thank you.
Just want to